Today I'm going to bake Kristin from fullproofbaking's recipe for basic open sourdough bread and see if I can replicate her results. Is it going to be a total failure? Hi, I'm Sune and I'm a food geek. Today I'm going to follow Kristin from fullproofbaking's recipe for a basic open sourdough bread. It's a very different process than my own, and while I don't go for the super open crumb, she has a gorgeous crumb every single time. So I thought it'd be interesting to see what happened if I followed her method and if I can replicate her results. She kind of uses many of those processes that I've gone away from, which is Autolyse and mixing in the starter and salt later in the process. I'm very excited to try this out. If you're new to this channel, I bake a lot of sourdough bread and I make delicious food from all over the world. If you want to see more of this content, please join me by subscribing and ringing the bell so you won't miss any future videos. The composition of the dough is 78.5% bread flour, 21.5% whole grain wheat flour, which I milled myself at the finest setting on my mock mill. 80% hydration, 2.3% salt, and 20% inoculation. That doesn't really sound that different, does it? I chose to use whole grain wheat like she does instead of using rye like I usually do. This will impact the flavor, but it'll also give more gluten to work with. Since I milled at the finest setting, it'll help mitigate the problem of bran hindering gluten development. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider becoming a member at Patreon. You can also buy some merch or use the links in the description for tools and ingredients. Thank you. Those were the words. This is me baking someone else's recipe. First, mix the Autolyse, 255 grams of bread flour, 70 grams of freshly milled whole grain wheat flour, and 253 grams of water. Then mix it until all the flour is hydrated. Leave it to Autolyse for 2 hours. When the 2 hours are up, it's time to mix in 65 grams of starter. Then leave it to rest for 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, we mix in 7.5 grams of fine salt. Leave the dough to rest for 30 minutes. Then do a bit of light folding to further build up the gluten. leave the dough to rest for 45 minutes. The next step is lamination. This should enhance the gluten development before we start folding. The dough is pulled really thin and then folded up. After the dough has been laminated, we put it in a shallow dish that we use for coil folding and let it rest for 45 minutes. Here you see me struggling with some plastic wrap, and that's because I didn't have a shower cap. This is going to be a little bit of a problem. Then we do 3 coil folds spaced out by 45 minutes. As you can tell, the top is a bit ragged from the dough sticking to the plastic wrap. The first coil fold. After struggling with even more plastic wrap, and a very small shower cap, I decided to use a small bulking container over top of the dough. The second coil fold, and the third coil fold. After the third coil fold is finished, it's time to do the shaping. Flour the counter pretty liberally. Then flour one side of the dough and pour it out onto the table. Then push some flour under the dough using your scraper. And remove the excess flour. Then pull the left and the right side of the dough out. Fold the right side about a third in over the dough. And then fold the left side halfway in over the dough. And roll up the dough. And move the dough to a Banneton. Be sure you have the seam at the top. Then I add my own little touch here, a stitch. Then put the dough in the fridge for about 18 hours. About an hour before I want to bake, I heat my oven to 260 degrees Celsius, 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Then it's time to bake. Flip the dough out onto some parchment paper. Score it. And then put it in the oven. Here I'm diverging a bit from her method since I just use a Dutch oven, the Challenger bread pan. My previous tests show that the amount of oven spring you get from steaming the oven and using a vessel over top are totally the same. Bake for 20 minutes. Then after 20 minutes, remove the lid from the Dutch oven. Lower the heat to 230 degrees Celsius, 450 degrees Fahrenheit, and bake for another 20 minutes. Then remove the bread from the oven and let it cool on a wire rack. Then after it's cooled, it's time to have a look at the crumb. Wow, that's the good stuff right there. And while I cut this bread up and eat it with copious amounts of butter, you can relish in these delicious pictures of this bread. So that wasn't half bad. Not as open of a crumb as Kristin usually gets, but much more open than I get in my own methods. There's no doubt that doing this a few more times, I could get the crumb to be even more open. It was a fun experiment for me. Are there any other sourdough bakers recipes that you'd like me to try out? Let me know in the comments. I hope you learned something today, and slap like now.